Hi, this is Matt Baker. Today I'm going to show you the complete family tree of House Targaryen from the HBO series House of the Dragon and Game of Thrones. Season 2 of House of the Dragon premieres this Sunday, so I thought it would be a perfect time to review the characters that we met in Season 1, all of whom happen to be located on the top part of the Targaryen family tree. This means that the first part of this video is going to be spoiler-free, unless of course you haven't yet watched Season 1, in which case I'd recommend that you instead watch the video we made 2 years ago. I'll leave a link to that in the description. However, if you have watched all of Season 1 and are getting ready to watch Season 2, this video is perfect for you. When I get to the part where there will be some Season 2 spoilers, based on what we know from the books, I'll warn you in advance, in case you want to stop watching. That's because in the second half of the video, I'm going to tell you what is probably going to happen in Season 2 and/or future seasons, because like I already mentioned, the show is based on the books, and we already know what happens in the book version. Now, as you probably know, House of the Dragon is actually a prequel of Game of Thrones. So at the end, I'm also going to show you how, if we keep going down the Targaryen family tree, we can connect the characters from the current show with the characters from the original show. So all in all, we're going to be covering over 400 years of Targaryen history. But before we begin, I'd like to point out that for those who live in Westeros, one of the key elements when it comes to survival is learning new things. A person always needs to be a pioneer if they're going to outmaneuver the competition. Well, the same is true in real life as well. To be successful and earn good money, like say $100K per year or more, you need to choose a profession that will be in high demand in the future. And one of the fastest growing industries these days is obviously tech. Some people spend years going to college and working dead-end jobs in the hopes of one day making it big, while others go to Triple 10. And after 5 to 9 months of studying, are soon working for companies like Apple, Google, and Amazon. This is because Triple 10 offers you a get a job or get a refund guarantee and gives its students projects with real companies. The result is that 87% of their grads get hired in 6 months or less. I mean, those are good odds. In Westeros, every main character has only a 50% chance of not dying before the end of a series. Now, it doesn't matter whether you've just graduated high school or you're interested in a career pivot. Sign up for a free career consultation with a Triple 10 advisor by clicking the link in the description or pinned comment. And use my code USEFULCHARTS to get 30% off any of their programs. Okay, back to the land of ice and fire. This is a map of the world that author George R.R. Martin has created. There are 2 main continents, Westeros, which is where most of the action takes place, but also Essos. The Targaryens originally lived in Essos, in a city called Valyria, which was the capital of the Valyrian Freehold. The Valyrian Freehold was ruled by 40 families called Dragon Lords, because they were able to ride dragons. And the Targaryens were just one of these 40 families. But then one day, a Targaryen named Daenerys had a premonition that Valyria would soon be destroyed. Her family therefore decided to move to Dragonstone, which had been built earlier as a sort of Valyrian outpost for trade with Westeros. They brought with them 5 dragons, including one named Balerion. Here, in a scene from Game of Thrones, we see Cersei visiting Balerion's skull. Anyhow, Daenerys' premonition was correct, and soon after the Targaryens moved to Dragonstone, Valyria was completely destroyed by some sort of major cataclysmic event, meaning that the Targaryens were now the only remaining Dragon Lords in the world. For the first 100 years after the doom of Valyria, the Targaryens remained on Dragonstone as the lords of that island. The rest of Westeros was divided into 7 independent kingdoms, although technically Dorne was a principality. Which brings us to Aegon's conquest, which is when the 10th Lord of Dragonstone, known as Aegon the Conqueror, decided to conquer the rest of Westeros. By this point, 4 of the 5 original dragons had died, leaving only Balerion, who was ridden by Aegon. However, 2 new dragons had been born, Vhagar and Meraxes, and these 2 were ridden by Aegon's 2 sister wives. Now, did I just say sister wives? Well, yes, I did. The Targaryens are well known for practicing incest in an effort to keep their line pure. Yeah, gross. Anyhow, the conquest was mostly successful, with only Dorne not submitting to his rule. At this point, Aegon built a new capital called King's Landing and created the Iron Throne from all the swords of those who he had conquered. He also took a new title, King of the Andals, the Rhoynar, and the First Men. Those are the 3 races that live in Westeros, as well as Lord of the 7 Kingdoms and Protector of the Realm. Upon his death, Aegon the Conqueror was followed by his son Aenys, his son Maegor, and then by Aenys' son Jaehaerys, who is the earliest Targaryen king to be depicted in House of the Dragon. He appears in a flashback near the end of his life, when the lords of Westeros were trying to decide who his successor should be. You see, he had outlived both of his sons, Aemon and Balon, and therefore the choice was between his eldest son's daughter, Rhaenys, or his younger son's son, Viserys. Even though Rhaenys was the more senior heir, the lords wanted a male ruler, so they chose Viserys. And it is therefore Viserys who is the king in House of the Dragon for most of Season 1. Rhaenys is still a main character though, and is known as the Queen Who Never Was. She is married to Corlys from House Velaryon, which is another house that came from Old Valyria, but did not consist of dragonlords. In Episode 1 of Season 1, the Queen's wife Aemma, who is also his cousin, is pregnant, and the hope is that she will have a son, because currently Viserys only has a daughter named Rhaenyra. Aemma does give birth to a boy, but she dies during the process, and then soon thereafter the baby dies too. Viserys is thus left with a choice, similar to the one that Jaehaerys had to make. Should he name his daughter Rhaenyra his heir, or should he name his younger brother Daemon? He chooses Rhaenyra, but then goes on to marry again to a woman named Alicent Hightower, the daughter of Otto Hightower, who serves on and off as the Hand of the King, which is sort of like the Prime Minister. Together, King Viserys and Queen Alicent have 4 children, a firstborn son named Aegon, a daughter named Helaena, who marries Aegon and has 2 children with him, another son named Aemond, and a 3rd son named Daeron, who was not seen in Season 1, but whom we'll meet in Season 2. Meanwhile, Rhaenyra marries Laenor Velaryon, the son of the Queen Who Never Was, and Daemon marries Laenor's sister, Laena. Rhaenyra and Laenor have 3 sons, Jacaerys, Lucerys, and Joffrey, while Daemon and Laena have 2 daughters, named Baela and Rhaena. However, the big secret that everyone knows but is not allowed to say is that the father of Rhaenyra's 3 boys is actually a man named Harwin Strong. You see, Laenor is gay, and therefore he and Rhaenyra have a sort of arrangement. The giveaway is that their 3 boys all have dark hair instead of the usual Targaryen white. But like I say, this fact is supposed to be ignored, and for all intents and purposes, Rhaenyra's eldest son Jace is in the direct line for the throne. Thus, there is a lot of tension brewing between Rhaenyra's 2 eldest sons and Alicent's 2 eldest sons. This is made worse by the fact that Jace, Luke, and Aegon all have dragons, but Aemond does not. Now, remember earlier when I mentioned by name the 3 dragons involved in the Targaryen conquest of Westeros? Well, of those original 3, only one is still living, Vhagar. Thus, she is currently the largest of the now 20 dragons, and at this point is being ridden by Laena. However, when Laena gives birth to a stillborn child and then realizes that she too is going to die from the difficult birth, she opts to have her dragon kill her by fire instead. At the funeral, Aemond takes the opportunity to make Vhagar his dragon. This angers Baela and Rhaena, who had assumed that one of them would inherit Vhagar. A fight between all the children ensues, and it ends with Luke slashing Aemon's eye with a knife, which is why he ends up wearing an eye patch for the rest of his life. At this point, something else important happens. Laenor fakes his death so that he can run off and live happily ever after with his lover. By this point, Harwin Strong is already dead, which means that Rhaenyra is now free to marry her uncle Daemon. Eventually, they have 2 children. Aegon, called the Younger, in order to distinguish him from Alicent's son Aegon, and Viserys. Then, a few years later, King Viserys dies, and basically, all hell breaks loose. Remember, he made it clear that he wanted Rhaenyra to be his heir. However, Queen Alicent now claims that on his deathbed, Viserys changed his mind and named her son Aegon instead. A lot of the nobles prefer this because they want a man in charge. So a civil war breaks out, known as the Dance of the Dragons. Those who support Rhaenyra become known as the Blacks, and those who support Aegon, now known as Aegon II, become known as the Greens. In the final episode of Season 1, Rhaenyra sends her 2 eldest sons out on their dragons with messages, Jace to the north and Luke to the south. Luke arrives at Storm's End, seat of House Baratheon, only to find Aemond and his massive dragon Vhagar already there. As Luke leaves, Aemond follows him, and his dragon, out of control, kills Luke and his dragon. This is where Season 1 ends. Which means if you don't want any spoilers, you need to stop watching this video right now. I'll give you a few extra seconds to find the pause button. Okay, let's continue. Now, I'm not going to give you step-by-step spoilers, but what I am going to do is tell you how the whole thing ends. As you can probably guess, a lot of people die. In fact, pretty much everyone, including both the claimants to the throne, Rhaenyra and Aegon II. However, Rhaenyra and Daemon's young son Aegon survives, as does Aegon II's daughter Jaehaera. These 2 then marry, uniting the Blacks and the Greens, and putting an end to the Civil War, with Aegon the Younger becoming Aegon III. Let me now tell you how the Targaryen family tree continues from this point, so we can see how the whole thing connects to the characters from Game of Thrones, using what we know from the books. During the reign of Aegon III, dragons go extinct. Only 4 had survived the Civil War, and of these 4, only 1 remained willing to be ridden. 1 more was born after that, but pretty soon they were all gone, resulting in Aegon III being remembered as Aegon the Dragonbane. He was followed by his son Daeron I, who went on to successfully conquer Dorne, and thus became the first Targaryen king to actually rule all 7 kingdoms. However, the victory was short-lived, and a rebellion followed, resulting in the death of the king. His brother Baelor I came next, and he made peace with Dorne, resulting in Dornish independence yet again. However, he did not have any children, nor did Daeron I, and therefore, after Baelor died, their uncle Viserys became king in his old age, taking the name Viserys II. He was then followed by his son Aegon IV, who in fan-made art is usually depicted as being morbidly obese. In his youth, he had a son with his sister wife named Daeron, but also many illegitimate children, including one with Baelor I's widow. That son, named Daemon Blackfyre, was 100% Targaryen blood, but was still considered illegitimate because his parents weren't married. This set the stage for yet another conflict, because there was some doubt over whether Daeron was actually the son of the king, or rather the son of the king's brother, Aemon, who was known as the Dragon Knight. Nevertheless, when Aegon IV died, Daeron succeeded him as Daeron II, and because he was married to a Dornish princess, he managed to negotiate a union with Dorne, finally making it a permanent part of the realm. However, he did have to deal with his half-brother Daemon, who led the first of 5 Blackfyre rebellions, all of which were unsuccessful, with the Blackfyre line eventually dying out. Daeron II was followed by his son Aerys I, and then by his other son, Maekar I. And this is where we get the first link to a character from Game of Thrones. Maekar was the father of both the next king, Aegon V, but also of a son named Aemon, who is later known as Maester Aemon. Aegon V is followed by Jaehaerys II, and then finally by Aerys II, better known as the Mad King, because, well, he went crazy, probably because of all those centuries of inbreeding. He's actually already dead by episode 1 of Game of Thrones, but he is referenced often throughout the series and is eventually seen in a flashback. So let me now summarize the events that occurred about 17 years prior to the beginning of Game of Thrones. At that point, Ned Stark's sister Lyanna was engaged to Robert Baratheon, who was not yet king, but instead simply the Lord of Storm's End. However, after a jousting tournament, Rhaegar, the son of the Mad King and heir to the throne, falls in love with Lyanna and kidnaps her, sparking what's known as Robert's Rebellion. Take note that Robert, as a Baratheon, is technically a Targaryen, albeit an illegitimate one. If we go all the way back to Aegon's conquest, you'll see that Aegon the Conqueror had an illegitimate half-brother named Orys, who founded House Baratheon. But back to the bottom of the chart. Robert ends up killing Rhaegar, and Jaime Lannister ends up killing the Mad King, which is why he's called the Kingslayer. Robert then takes the Iron Throne, and the 2 remaining Targaryen children are exiled. As for Lyanna, she simply disappears, and Robert instead marries Jaime's sister Cersei, with whom he has 3 children. But as we've seen so many times already on this tree, the real father is actually someone else. In this case, it's Cersei's brother, Jaime. Again, gross. During season 1 of Game of Thrones, King Robert is killed, resulting in the War of the Five Kings. Joffrey takes the throne, but since he is rumored to be illegitimate, Robert's brother Stannis claims the throne too, as well as Robert's other brother, Renly. On top of this, Ned Stark's son Robb is proclaimed King of the North, and Balon Greyjoy is declared King of the Iron Islands. So those are the 5 kings. But, surprise, surprise, as the seasons go on, every one of these kings ends up dead, leaving Joffrey's little brother Tommen sitting on the Iron Throne. But what about those 2 Targaryens who were exiled? Well, Viserys dies very early on in the show, leaving us to believe that Daenerys is the only Targaryen left. She starts to build an army in the hopes of one day taking back the Iron Throne, and she even manages to get a hold of a few dragons. But near the end of the show, there's a huge twist. It seems Lyanna Stark actually fell in love with Rhaegar, and together they had a secret son named Aegon, who we've known all along as Jon Snow. Lyanna actually died in childbirth, and her brother Ned snuck the baby away and raised him as his own bastard son. Near the end of the show, this is revealed, and Jon Snow ends up having an incestuous hookup with his aunt Daenerys. But then, at the very end, Daenerys goes crazy, and Jon Snow ends up having to kill her. So, Jon Snow becomes king? Nope. All the surviving main characters, including Jon Snow, get together and decide that from now on, the monarchy will be an elected position, and they elect to make Brandon Stark the new king. He's known as Bran the Broken, because in season 1 he is pushed from a tower and becomes disabled. However, he ends up becoming the wisest and most morally upright person in the entire show, which hopefully means he'll make a great king. So presumably, this is where the Targaryen line ends, because Jon Snow opts to return to his previous life as a member of the Night's Watch, tasked with guarding the far north. The men of the Night's Watch take a vow to not marry and not have any children. So once Jon, aka Aegon, dies, there will be no more Targaryens. Thanks for watching.